Mm. Well, I think we can start with stating the obvious, and that is that it's a huge blow to the liberalism in the West. Right, another blow, I should say. We know that liberalism is on decline in the West, and it is on decline for some time. And this just adds to it. I probably wouldn't go as far as saying that this is the final nail in the liberalism's coffin in the West, but it surely is a significant nail. And we know that liberalism is on decline. Liberal democracies are on decline around the world. But there is a difference between what is happening in the Europe and what is happening in the rest of the world. Because if the liberal democracy, and part of which is liberalism, if that is declining elsewhere in the world, that necessarily doesn't show that it's a manifestation of people's will. For example, look at the Putin's creativity, way in which he has created his own legal system, constitutional system that could, at least in theory, could keep him in power for the rest of his life. People had absolutely no say in that. Similarly, if there is military coup anywhere in the world, say for example in Myanmar, if that happened, again that is nothing to do with the public's wishes. Or if the democratically elected government of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, if that was ousted by a Western-backed military coup, again that is nothing to do with the public's will. So that is always imposed on people, and then people are told to just get on with it, and that's that. But what is happening in Europe? Well, that is much different, because when you look at this, the rise in the tide of far right populist governments, be it Poland or Hungary or Austria or now Italy, or if you look at the other political parties who are not necessarily in the government, but they are set to become in the government, or at least they have a significant power in the country, right? France or Sweden, for example, the Democrats there originated from a neo-Nazi group, or Brexit in the UK. I mean, all of those things, they happened democratically, either through an election or a referendum. So that tells us that the general public is sick and tired of liberalism. And that is why I say it's a huge blow to liberalism, this Italian election. Well, because liberalism, by its nature, is an unnatural thing for human beings. Us, the human beings, we are people who create communities, right? We have a sense of belongingness. We make systems. We want to coexist. We are the people who create collective responsibilities, right, and pass on the knowledge and wisdom to the next generations through institutes such as schools or universities and so forth. That is how it is supposed to be, and that is how it is, by the way, in Europe. But when it comes to the individual's life, then the liberalism takes precedent over everything, and people are given certain success benchmarks. That if you want to be successful, you need to have your own house and car. Probably you got to be able to afford to go on to a holiday a couple of times a year. I mean, those sort of things people are reduced to, and everybody struggles to achieve those on an individual basis. That is an unnatural thing. So liberalism takes human nature away from humans, and that creates stress. That creates a feeling of unease. People are not comfortable with it. Then it goes on to the next thing, that when you want to achieve these all these materialistic things that I've mentioned, cost of that comes in the form of your family life. Now, for example, in one of the surveys in Italy, younger women, if I remember correctly, women between 17 and 24, 53% of them, they said that they are not considering having children. And the reason they gave was it's career. That is important. So the liberal countries are not reproducing enough, and that is the problem. I mean, the replacement ratio is 2.1, which is to say that each woman should have 2.1 children. Now, obviously, you cannot have 0.1 child, but we are talking about a mathematical result here. So 2.1, that is the replacement ratio, which is to say that the new generations would replace the older ones, and your population will not suffer a decline. At the moment, the highest country in the Europe is France, and there is 1.9, right? So well below the replacement ratio. And if you look at the lower end of the spectrum, countries like Italy or Spain, it's fairly close to 1.3, 1.2, 1.1. That is the sharp decline, and that is the problem that the Europe is facing. So what do you do when that happens? Well, either you incentivize people, you give them incentives to reproduce, to have more children. Now that hasn't worked. Scandinavian countries, they have tried that. One of the most lucrative systems they've offered, but no, these people don't care. Well, the other alternative is to have the mass immigration, mass immigration. Europe, for example, so some safe estimates tell us that they will need in excess of 150 million people to keep Europe going. That hurts local communities when they see people from Africa, Asia, other places. They come there and they live with them, and then the local people, indigenous people, they see some cultural changes will take place, and it makes them uncomfortable. And then the resentment comes in the form of, well, we don't need these bloody immigrants. And that is when these populist governments or the political parties, they tap into this emotion, and people think that, well, these guys are our saviors, and that is how everything changes. But what the Europe does not understand is that these populist and these far-right governments are not your solutions. They aren't. You need to reproduce more. You got to do that. Immigration is not your problem. Immigration is the solution to your problems. And if you don't like this solution, but then to be able to get rid of this solution, you are bringing in a bigger problem. That is far right. That is extremism. That has never worked in the Europe before. We've tried that quite a few times, right? We know what happened back in the Mussolini's time and Hitler's time and so forth. These are bad ideas. Well, it frightens me, frankly. I don't know what the future Europe will look like. The liberalism, it had the inevitable result that it will result in population decline. And the necessary consequence of that is that it will cause a decline in economy, which is happening. Right, Europe at the moment, for example, it needs a lot more people to fund the pensioners, but pensioners are increasing, pipelines are drying, which means that there are going to be less and less people. So Europe is now facing a dilemma to either reduce significant funds that go into the health sector and the care sector, or simply there won't be enough money. And then insurmountable debt is another problem which goes side by side. The people are literally at a stage where they are leaving for the forthcoming generations. The inheritance which is left that comes in the form of debt. So the previous generation has left that hundreds of billions of euros or pounds to the next generation. That is basically what is happening. It's shameful. It really is shameful. And it's happening. Now the European solution, which is not a rational solution, it's an emotional solution that is referring to the right-wing populist parties, and they sort of feed each other. So people look at them as their saviors, and they look at people as that we can tap into their emotions and we will get the power. And this frightens me. Right? Liberalism, fair enough, is not a good idea. I know that. Other people will disagree with me, but that's exactly what is happening. The result of liberalism. But having a far right Europe, that's a scary prospect. We know what has happened in the world because of Europe. We know what has happened before because of the far right extremism in Europe. It hurts. It kills people. Second World War is not too long ago. Right. So, honestly speaking, I don't know what future is there for Europe, but whichever way we take at the moment, it doesn't look good.